This is Mitch Berukowitz. We're at the Benzinga conference, and this is Conversations with Merida Capital and Mitch Berukowitz. And I'm joined, my first guest of the day is Jessica Billingsley of MJ Freeway.
Thank you for having me.
One of the pioneers of the industry. And thank you so much for spending time. I know that this is an unusual format. Usually people want sound bites. But the whole goal of this is to really get the MJ Freeway story and have people really understand what goes on behind the scenes, and so that they understand what happens with the public, the public face of MJ Freeway, and then they get a chance to understand from the CEO's perspective what happens behind the scenes. So my first question, to lead off the conversation, is you obviously were a pioneer in space. You've been up and running for how many years?
9 years this month.
9 years. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And
But I actually entered the space 10 years ago.
Amazing, amazing. So you started in Denver, Colorado. And at a time when electronic resources were somewhat limited, you somehow took this step to create a company called MJ Freeway. One question, why the name? And then second, give us a sense of what it was like in the early Denver days to create an electronic tool when there was a lot of historical pioneering knowledge and people were doing things in their garage and et cetera, et cetera. And electronic tools may have been a difficult thing to get adoption in a big way. So kind of give me, just walk me through those thoughts that in the beginning of MJ Freeway.
Sure. Well, so I mentioned that I'm going on a decade in cannabis.
Amazing.
So I actually entered the industry as an investor and an operator. That's how I first got started. So I invested in one of the very first legally licensed operators in Colorado.
Okay.
And as the investor owner who owned an IT services business at the time, they asked me to choose what software to use to run in their business.
Okay.
So we were looking for software that would...
So that was a common question you might get from an operator in general? Because of your background.
What am I even going to use?
Okay.
Yes. How am I going to track any of this product, and then how am I going to sell it? And what was clear to me, just with experience in other regulated industries, was that there were going to be some coming compliance needs that
you were way ahead of the curve on that one.
People were going to want to know what they were getting,
right.
And they were going to want to know where it came from,
right.
and generally what we think of today. In fact, we invented seed-to-sale tracking. If you go to seed-to-sale.com, it still redirects to mjfreeway.com. To my chagrin, we were not successful in trademarking it, and I didn't fight harder, but nevertheless.
Trademarking seed-to-sale, you mean?
Trademarking the phrase seed-to-sale.
So we don't want to bore people by getting into the idea expression dichotomy of trademarking, so I'm just going to let you roll with that. But
no,
okay.
Fair enough. Okay, we'll move on from being bored.
Sure.
Okay, so I had invested in this operator, and they had asked me to choose a software, and I had identified this. And look, no technology geek ever sets out to build from scratch if you can possibly repurpose something. So it was born out of a true need for innovation, need for something new. So did you build it on,
was there something you saw? Because you didn't have a lot of guidelines back then. I often tell people that in 2014, when my first operation that I was involved with went live, we had nothing. We were in the wilderness with machetes. So what was that is that how you view, obviously that's my analogy, but I'm sure you have your own. What would be your analogy for what the early days were like for discovering those IT solutions?
Wilderness with machetes, I'm not sure I can top that one much, but...
I've had a lot of time to develop my own analogies.
No great analogies.
Okay, fine.
But I certainly looked at what type of software technology was available in different other regulated industries. And there are great things about some of the alcohol tracking technology that exists out there, about the pharma, about general agriculture. I mean, in general, when you go to the grocery store, you have a pretty good idea that there have been some type of rigor, standards, or compliance before you buy your food.
Right.
And the challenge with cannabis is that you couldn't take any one of those and adapt it for cannabis. You really needed a hybrid model. And that was something that had to be created from scratch.
And do you think, let me just jump in there. So do you think regulators we're going to jump around a little bit because you just naturally brought a thought to my mind of, do you think regulators in other states should have maybe, when thinking about the required solutions, have looked at what's available just to understand? Obviously, cannabis has its own idiosyncratic risks and mold and safety testing and all those things, and that's an element of what you bring. But don't you think that regulators maybe early on were moving fast and weren't necessarily looking at what the world for quality control looked like and how this idiosyncratic plant might provide challenges for someone like yourself? Obviously you didn't set out to do this, but so what do you think about that?
Maybe, but regulators in general are often looking for technologists like myself to advise them on what what we can do, they don't necessarily, I wouldn't say that it was their job necessarily to say, hey, here is exactly the technology you should use and track. They go and they ask experts to advise them on what they should track. And you know, we have a seat at the table with most regulatory agencies and have for a long time.
Now, remember, we're kind of still talking early years, so
I mean, certainly in the early years.
Right, and you weren't in the conversation, so
we absolutely were in all of the first advisory boards.
Right, right, but so when you think, what I'm actually asking is slightly different. I'm asking more about regulators, they might say what is capable, but the rules don't always comport with what is possible early on, and what is easily possible. And that actually leads into one of my core questions for you, which is, I'm sure like anyone else who has a solution that is used by several thousand people, congratulations on that again, by the way.
Thank you.
You hear complaints all the time, and those complaints could be from it doesn't do this, one small thing that one person wants customized, all the way to broad system-wide complaints that you might get in any state. And you know, that's not a knock on you. It's the reality is in an industry that's developing from the ground floor, and you being one of the pioneers, you're going to run into some of that. You're discovering things just like everyone else. So what is your internal process or your external process for taking in those complaints, prioritizing them, which ones get, because resources are not unlimited, time is not unlimited. I know you're very passionate about the tech side, but the reality is it's a fast-moving industry, and you are in some ways a bottleneck. The systems are a bottleneck. So how do you handle that responsibility when people are complaining? Because I'm sure you hear it all the time. People that's the first thing they bring up to you, an operator. So that's a lot of pressure.
So we handle it in a couple different ways, and certainly at MG Freeway we're very metrics driven.
Okay.
So we track tickets by total number of customers.
Right.
We track how many of our customers vote on or report certain issues or certain problems.
You're using it as votes, but I know what you mean. You're saying how many instances of a certain thing are brought to your attention.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And then we have a product governance board, and we identify based on our resources, how and what we're going to prioritize.
Okay.
And we're always looking for creative solutions as well. We're very focused on our core values at MJ Freeway. One of our values is be part of the solution.
Right.
So it means to be part of the solution for our clients, for our operators, because at the end of the day, you know, that's why. That's why we're in business.
Right.
I would like to
prioritizing. I just want to, but just to go back. So, but the prioritization of these, if 50 problems or 50 concerns, issues, whatever you might call them, come up, there are some that are probably mission critical path.
Absolutely.
So, what is the process for you internally prioritizing resources? Like, how many people are building the core product, constantly revising it, updating it, and how many people are on like the strike team, or I don't know how you call it internally, but I'm not I do come from a tech background as well, just like you, but I'm not as deep in the, so I think it's great for people to get a sense of what it's like at MJ Freeway. It's frenetic, I'm sure, every day. You probably feel you sleep very well at the end of the night, to the extent you can sleep, because we're all working frenetically. So what does that strike team look like, or what does the core team look like when it comes to your actual core solution?
So I think you're asking about the sort of the product development side of the solution. So we've got roughly 50 people that are focused in that area of the company. About 10 on what we think of as the product side, the side that decides what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, whose job it is to poll stakeholders. So they poll not only our internal stakeholders, which would include something like prioritization of tickets, support, how many tickets have you collected on X?
A company called Market Access,
but,
we're QA, QC, and, it was for bond trading, it was revolutionizing the electronic bond trading. So it's probably very similar where you get a call from like Goldman Sachs and they'd say, by the way, this audit ticket has an error spotting the treasury. Someone's got to jump on that, and that's got to get fixed immediately. But then there's more like core development. I was more talking about the runway of how you fix or amend, because you're at this critical juncture of people and the regulator, which is the core of our industry. Our industry doesn't grow without these solutions. You are fundamental to the bottom of the pyramid as it's getting built.
We certainly do think of ourselves as the backbone upon which we enable compliance, we enable regulation, we enable taxation, and so we are core, we are critical.
I agree.
This is going to date me, but we talk about dial tone. In a way, we're dial tone, and nobody thinks about dial tone anymore. But to be fair, you asked me about MJ Freeway earlier.
Yeah, the name.
Unfortunately, that dates me also.
Okay.
So MJ is short for Mary Jane, or marijuana.
Oh, Mary
MJ.
Jane. We call it cannabis nowadays, but sure. Okay.
We do. So yes, and
See how it says
at
the Cannabis Capital Conference, not the Marijuana Capital.
we certainly call it cannabis, and yet there is an important piece to claiming a name.
Sure.
And for us, especially in those very early days, the idea, and it doesn't seem revolutionary now, but
Right.
the idea that we would claim anything related to marijuana or cannabis in our name and say that that's what we were doing, that we were actually going to provide
Right.
software to marijuana or to
Right.
cannabis operators,
Right.
that was a really, really big deal. And it actually inspired a lot of confidence and loyalty in us early on,
Right.
that we were willing to do that, willing to claim that.
Well, it's funny you say that because Merida has no relation to cannabis. It's the location in Spain of an aqueduct system.
Is that where it came from?
The Aqueduct of the Miracles. I wanted
Okay.
something. First of all, I have children, and when I started Merida, it was still societal. The questions were unanswered with how adoptable this was going to be. Obviously, in the 3 years since, things have changed a lot, and I'm sure you see the acceleration where early on it was like pushing a rock up a hill. Now it's a much smaller rock and a much less steep hill. But not Steep Hill Labs, which we're also investors in. But I think for me, I wanted a name that I could say and not have my kids immediately associate it with cannabis. Not because I was embarrassed or anything, but because the medical side was just being developed. And the truth is, we all have our own reasons, but I want to convey agriculture and innovation, but simple technologies, because that's kind of what we invest in. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted this chance, is because I think of MJ Freeway as, again, a core principle and a core part of what people need to perform. But at the same time, you're in a very challenging place where that bottleneck leads to, in a space where it's moving, warp speed, people often think you have to be the solution instead of a solution. And sometimes they probably put demands on you guys, I'm sure, that are not necessarily in your core bailiwick. It might not be your solutions problem, it might be their operating problem. But you can't really say that to them.
Well, we can.
Okay.
Right. So.
Wow, okay.
So.
How's that for customer relations?
Well,
I thought the customer's always right.
the customer is always right.
that
However,
was- yeah.
they're going to, because customers will come and tell you how to solve something.
Right.
They'll say, you need to put X field here in this thing. And it's our job. It's the job of any good software developer, software provider, to collect all of that and to say, what is the actual problem here that we're trying to solve?
Right.
Not just what they're saying, do this thing here in this piece, or just make this one thing work this way. It's not our job to take that and to prioritize this long list of do it this way. It's our job to take it and to look at it and say, is there a larger problem here? And then what would be the solution to that problem? How would we go about that? And that's how you work on inefficiencies.
Right.
That's how you continue to innovate and look forward. And it's why we still exist. It's why we're still relevant 9 years later, because we're doing that. We're looking at the whole set and thinking about how do we solve the actual problem.
Right. So that actually leads to a natural question. So one of the things when we met, I don't know, maybe a year ago at one of the Merida Connectivity dinners, it probably was close to a year ago at this point. I thought I really appreciate your candor on, hey, everyone kind of knows MJ Freeway. There's been a few things that we could have done better. So we at Merida do a sort of personality test for the investments we make, a corporate personality. And one of the things we really look for is companies who you can't really fix, whether it's corporate or other issues, if you don't acknowledge. And you were very forthright about, hey, we're getting better all the time, we're learning. So what is one thing that you can say, hey, I really wish we would have done this as a corporation better, not individualistic things, but whether it's related to data or any of the things that I think they're pretty well documented at this point for you guys, and you've been very candid, and you guys had a public filing, so obviously that's its own disclosure. So what's one thing that you, Jessica Billingsley, said, you know what, as a company, here's one thing I learned, and here's how we're fixing it, and what's just one thing, in your history that you can just sort of dig up? And that's not an easy one to answer, but
So this changes over time, right?
Yeah.
And there was a point in time where I would have said the one thing was that we, as an ancillary business, thought that we would be immune to some of the industry challenges.
right.
And that we would have no problem with our banking services. We would have no problem with credit card processing. We would have no problem with some of these things.
Right.
And so we've, I think, put ourselves in good alignment with the industry since then. I serve on the board of the National Cannabis Industry Association, and we really work to make sure that our interests are always in alignment with our clients' interests.
So is that one thing you think that you could have done better earlier? I mean, in terms of just directly answering the question, is there anything you can think of, though, that you said, this was a learning moment for me, and I learned, and our company's gotten stronger because of it, and I'm just curious if there's one thing you can think of, or a few, or just general concepts, someone sneezing in the background, if there's general concepts that you might think of, like, it's a corporate personality thing. I don't mean an individual event.
Sure.
It's more like something you learned along your path that you go, I'm glad I learned that. That was very helpful to the trajectory of MJ Freeway.
Well, I think it's...
And it can be brief, by the way, because I want to move on to our final question.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
So,
all right. Well,
yeah.
so to answer that, I think you're alluding to, and certainly as you look at our company, you think about, well, what was the hardest moment? We were the victim of a cyber attack a couple of years ago.
Right.
And that... There is no silver lining,
Okay.
to something like that. I just want to say that first.
Okay, that's fine.
And it's fairly complicated from a technology point of view in terms of what could we have done better.
The reality is more complicated. Yes.
What exactly happened? What could we have done better? I think the biggest learning moment in all of that for me is what it means to be a leader,
right?
And what it means for a team, because it's easy. You're in cannabis is growing quickly, everyone's growing and making more money year over year, and
at least perceptively.
Well, certainly maybe I should say we're grossing more revenue year.
That's a fair point.
Over year.
You've been in this for 9 years, and even so, in the traditional world, that just show you how hard adoption is. I mean, I don't remember what your public filing said on your revenue, but just to show how hard it can be to get adoption on an electronic. Even in a space where you were one of the pioneers, it's hard to get over $15, $20 million of revenue annually to this point, not just you, I'm saying everyone. So that leads to my last question, which is I try to leave the last question where I ask a question more about the economics of the macro space so that people can walk away, because that's what Merida does, right? We collect data, information voraciously.
Sure.
Everyone knows that about us. So my final question to you is, what is the largest market cap and revenue of an ancillary company? And it can be any ancillary. So anyone who does not touch the plant core, it could be Kush Bottles, which we're investors in. To anyone, what is the largest ancillary market cap on December 31st, 2020, assuming that December is not like this December where everything just tanks? And what is their revenue? What is like an ancillary company's revenue? Like, just think out loud so people get a sense of someone as an insider. What do you think that number is? Those two numbers. So largest market cap of any ancillary company in the space. What's the biggest market cap? I think right now it's roughly $800 million or something of that nature. What do you think that could be in 2 years?
So first, I think the largest is going to be one of the supply companies, and I think
you mean like equipment or a...
So I'm thinking more...
I didn't even ask where they might be. You really went... Yeah, okay.
Consumption accessories.
Okay, fine. Consumption accessories.
Consumption accessories.
Okay, and what is their market cap?
It's in the billions.
Narrow it down to 2 or 3 billion.
So their revenue...
2 billion, 3 billion?
Well, it's tricky, right? Are they going to get the same market cap percentage,
Well, I'm asking you, you're an expert, you've been doing this for a long time, and this is education for people who may just be watching this first time and have no idea what you've done and how you've gotten here. So I want you to bring your perspective. So it's the question for you.
Okay, well, give me just a moment. I've got a couple things that I think are important that I want to say here. So I think the largest will be consumption accessories, and part of that is that they're able to sell in...
Are we talking about medical delivery devices, anything?
We're talking about pipes, we're talking about something that you might see in a traditional head shop.
Okay.
And so a consumption company like that is ancillary to the cannabis industry, that does sell their products in dispensaries, but also sells their products in many other outlets.
That's a great point.
That is a company that will likely have the most revenue, so maybe hundreds of millions, and then have a corresponding...
Traded 10x or 15x that.
Exactly.
Okay.
But what I think is important and really important that I would love, for anyone paying attention to this market, this sector, to understand about the technology space is that there is a mostly untapped market opportunity. You talked about us and how we're at 11 million run rate now, and how hard it is to get to break through that 20 million barrier and what that means, although I think we'll achieve it.
Well, I'd be remiss, let me just jump in there for a second. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that you collaborated with New Frontier on what I think is a groundbreaking consumer study. So obviously, what you're saying is completely true about the untapped really is when we think of 2019 as the year of the consumer. It's when consumer segmentation, and that doesn't happen without your data. It doesn't happen without your service, without your company. And whether or not the true silver bullet of MJ Freeway 5 years from now is data and aggregation and predictive analytics or the core seed to sale, who knows? But I'm gonna leave it on that, which is, thank you, first of all, thank you so much for spending your time. I know it's a busy day for you. There's tons of investors here. The Benzinga conference is amazing. So I want to thank you a ton. It's been great to get to know you over the last year, and congratulations on your current success, and good luck on the future.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jessica. All right, take care.